All right, so at this point, we are ready to go ahead and deploy the cluster autoscaler feature itself. And to do that, we are going to start out by just downloading the YAML manifest file for the cluster autoscaler. So if you wanted to view it, you could actually just grab the URL here to that manifest file, and then just open that up in your browser here, and it'll just kind of show you what that looks like. So we've got a few different resources here. Each of these 3 dashes here is basically just a separator in between resources within the manifest. So we've got, it looks like a service account here that's going to allow us to authenticate to AWS. We've got a role-based access control cluster role resource here. And this is basically defining the permissions that our autoscaler is going to have on our cluster. So it's got a bunch of different permissions here against different API groups and resource types within our cluster. Then we've got a role down here as well, which also is defining some permissions. We've got a cluster role binding, and we've got a role binding. And then finally, we've got a deployment here. And the deployment controller is actually what's going to create the replica set and the pod for the cluster autoscaler itself. And you can see that the replicas are only set to 1. So the cluster autoscaler is only going to have a single pod that is running that particular feature. I haven't scaled it up beyond a single replica. That could potentially introduce unwanted behavior if you have multiple instances of the cluster autoscaler resource that are basically kind of competing with each other to scale the cluster up and down. But this is kind of the configuration of it right here. This is the spec, the pod spec for the entire cluster autoscaler feature. And this is what we're actually going to be editing a little bit later on right here. These are the command line parameters that are being passed in to the autoscaler itself. So the binary is right here, and then you've got a bunch of command line parameters or arguments that are being passed into it. And so we're going to edit these in just a moment. All right, so let's go ahead and just download that locally, and then we'll do a quick modification on it to insert our cluster name in there. So I'll go ahead and copy this command, and we'll go ahead and just actually create a directory for it here. So let me do make dir git /k8s-ca, and then I'll go into that directory just so we have a scratch space to work on. And I'll go ahead and run that curl command. That should download that file locally. So here it is. It's about 4 kilobytes in size. And so now we need to edit it, and we'll do vim on that file. And then we're going to go ahead and search for the placeholder text, your cluster name. So let's do a / capital YOUR, and sure enough, there it is. And now what we're going to do is edit that. So let's go ahead and hit A here. Go to the end of the line and hit A, and then we'll erase that placeholder. And then we can go ahead and just paste in the name of our cluster here, wonderful monster dash a bunch of random numbers. And once we've done that, we can go ahead and just save this file. So let's do WQ to save it. And now we're going to just do a kubectl apply against our cluster. So let me make sure I'm in the right context. I'm going to change my context back over to this new cluster that we have created here. All right, good. And then now we're going to just run kubectl apply on that particular file. So that's going to go out and create the resources in our cluster here. And it looks like we're getting a little bit of a warning here. Let's see what that is coming from. And it looks like it's actually automatically just added that missing annotation in there, so we don't need to worry about that. It could just be something that's out of date in the AWS EKS documentation, so we'll go ahead and just ignore that and move on here. So now what we're going to do is to apply the annotation for the service account here on our cluster autoscaler. So what we need to do is find the IAM role that was created by the CloudFormation stack that was deployed from EKS CTL before that attached our policy. So what we could do is head over to the AWS Management Console, and we'll just go to our stack right here that created the IAM service account. And we're just going to look for this ID here of this particular role. And then we can just copy that to our clipboard, and that's what we're going to substitute for this placeholder right here. So this is going to create the annotation. So let's run kubectl annotate, and I'm actually going to bring this over into Notepad as well. We'll plug that in here, and then we'll go ahead and paste in our role identity here. And actually this only copied the role name. I actually just noticed that. So what we want to do is come back to the console here, and then we want to copy the not just the name of the role, but we actually need the ARN of the role. So I'm going to actually click through to the role itself, and then we're just going to look for the ARN here, and we'll copy that ARN to our clipboard, and then come back to our Notepad instance here, and we'll go ahead and paste that in. And of course, because I'm in PowerShell here, I can't use these backslashes, so I'm just going to replace those with backticks. And then let's go ahead and run this command. That should create the annotation. And it looks like it already was set. And if you want to just confirm that it's overwritten, you can just tack on the overwrite parameter, and that should ensure that the annotation is there so that the cluster autoscaler knows which role it's going to be using in order to call the different AWS APIs for autoscaling groups. Cool, so now that we've got that completed here, let's go ahead and see what's next. So the next thing we want to do is add on this safe to evict annotation. So what we're going to do is just come in here and run this kubectl command, and you don't need to specify any custom values for this, because what we're doing in this case is we're just patching the existing deployment. And if you created the deployment controller using the manifest file from right up here, then it should already have a matching name of cluster autoscaler. And you can actually confirm that ahead of time by just running kubectl --namespace kube-system get pod, or actually get deployment. So let's do get deploy. And as you can see, the deployment name is just cluster autoscaler. So I'll go ahead and paste in this command here. And of course, it's going to complain because it's got backslashes in it again. They're just in the documentation, they're kind of assuming that you're using bash. And so they're just providing bash scripts in there without really considering the fact that some people are actually using Windows. All right, so it looks like it's complaining about an invalid character. So let's see what's going on there. And this error message is actually just coming from kubectl itself because of the way that it's interpreting this patch argument right here. So one of the things that we can do in order to resolve that is to follow the Stack Overflow article here, which kind of describes how to resolve it. And so when you're passing in a JSON object into kubectl, you actually want to escape it just like you have here. And so what we need to do is basically take the existing JSON string and then convert it to additional JSON, because it's going to be decoded essentially twice. And so what we can do in PowerShell is relatively easy. We can just wrap this huge string here in parentheses, do dash, and then we'll pipe this string into convert to JSON. And that should do what we need it to. In fact, we might need to, no, we don't need the depth parameter here. So that should just work fine here. So you can see that the cluster autoscaler has been patched now. And so we can just do a kubectl, and then we'll do describe the deployment cluster autoscaler in the namespace kube system. And that should show us all of the annotations that are on it. And as you can see, it says safe to evict is false. All right, so now we are done with that section. So let's head back over to the EKS documentation here. And they want us to do one more thing in AWS EKS, and that is to edit the deployment itself. And we're going to add in two different options into the deployment configuration, or the pod spec for the deployment itself. And so this is going to pass in two additional command line parameters to the cluster autoscaler itself, as you can see in this example right down here. And so we're basically just going to go to the end of all these different options, and we're going to add in these two right here. So let's head over to our terminal here again. We'll do a kubectl edit deploy / cluster autoscaler in the namespace kube system. And we're going to go ahead and find the spec for the autoscaler itself. So that would be this section right here. And then under the pod spec itself, we have our containers. And our container here has the cluster autoscaler with a bunch of parameters. So all we need to do is just add in a couple more. So we'll add in a dash. And then I'm just going to copy these directly from the documentation here. So the first one is going to be balance similar node groups. So We'll paste that one in, then we'll create another line here, add a dash. This is basically just the syntax in YAML for an array element, so we're just adding additional array elements here, and then we're going to add in the other option here, which is skip nodes with system pods. All right, so we'll just save that and close it, and then kubectl will go ahead and apply that change to our deployment controller. So now, if we do a kubectl describe on it, it should actually be creating a new replica set. Sure enough, you can see it is scaling up this new replica set right here with a new name. And so if we do kubectl get all namespace cube system, that should show us kind of what's happening at a higher level here. That should show us the deployment controller, the replica sets, and the actual pod itself. So as you can see, we've got a brand new replica set here that was created by the deployment controller just 29 seconds ago, and it created a new pod under that replica set here, and it's currently in the running state. And that's a good sign, because that means that our cluster autoscaler component should be healthy here. So now at this point, we can go ahead and update the image. And so for setting the image, we're just going to find the latest release number, and then we're going to set the image. And you can do this by using kubectl set image, or you can actually rerun the command that we just did to edit the deployment controller, open it up in your local editor, and then reapply it again. And so if we scroll down to the pod spec right down here, you can see this is our cluster autoscaler pod, and it's currently using the image version 1.21.0. But as we saw in one of the earlier videos, there is actually a newer version of it out here. So if you go back to Autoscaler, go to releases, and then we're just going to look for the latest 1.21 release. So it looks like there is no 1.21 release on this page, so I'm going to go to the next page, look for 1.21. And it looks like the latest version is .2 here. So we're going to go ahead and use that as the version. Make sure that you have the V in front of there as well. And so I'm going to change that 0 to a 2. And we're going to hit Control S to save that, close it, and then kubectl will go ahead and apply that change once again. So now if we do kubectl get all, because we made a change to the image, the deployment controller is going to have to create another replica set. So here's our new replica set here, and it went ahead and is creating a new pod right up here. And after just a few seconds, that pod should be in the up and running state. And so that's kind of the final step to actually setting up our autoscaler component here. It looks like it's up and running and healthy. We got the image tag correct, and so at this point, we should be able to kind of test out cluster autoscaling. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.